Welcome to 5 Good Questions. I'm your host, Jake Taylor. Our guest today is Lord John Browne. John trained as an engineer and was the CEO of BP from 1995 to 2007. He remains an influential leader in the energy business and is chairman of the Crick Institute, a fellow of the Royal Society, past president of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and the former chairman of Tate. He's a collector of antique books and art and the author of 4 previous books, including The Glass Closet, Why Coming Out is Good Business. Today we're going to be discussing his book, Make, Think, Imagine, Engineering the Future of Civilization. Let's ask John 5 good questions. But first, I'm happy to announce my literary debut, The Rebel Allocator, is now available on Amazon in both print and digital formats. You could say it's about time. I've been pouring my heart into this book for more than 3 years. A well-known SoCal billionaire received an early copy of the book and actually called me to say he enjoyed the story and was adamant that I get it made into a movie. Talk about a surreal experience getting 20 minutes on the phone with one of my heroes. My friend Tobias Carlyle had this to say: Jacob Taylor has written a modern-day investment classic. The Rebel Allocator is reminiscences of a stock operator for value investors. It's a fictionalized retelling of the lessons in The Intelligent Investor in an accessible page-turner. If you want to learn how to invest like Warren Buffett by sitting at his knee, this is the book for you. Wow, how flattering is that? I was blown away when he sent me that. I've created dozens of ad-free author interviews over the last 5 years and never asked for anything in return. If you've gotten any value out of these efforts, please do me a personal favor and pick up a copy of The Rebel Allocator. I promise you won't regret it. And now, on with the show. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. My guest today is Lord John Browne, and he is the author of Make, Think, Imagine. And you know what I really enjoyed about this book was that I felt like it took a lot of the best parts about a book that Ray Kurzweil would write, where it's this fanciful, new technology. But he also blended the things that I like about Matt Ridley, like the rational optimist, where it was just much more, you could see how we were going to get there. So thank you for sharing that kind of your insight on engineering and science, first of all.
It's a great pleasure.
So let's jump right into our questions. Question number 1, do you have any sense that a lot of these cutting-edge technologies they really rely on interventions into complex systems that perhaps were maybe fattening the probability tails of maybe negative outcomes? Another way of saying it would be, is all this new technology inviting more black swans into our lives? And I think about, for instance, asbestos. We had no idea that it ended up causing mesothelioma, and yet, here we find ourselves, and we had to tear it out. And what do you think about that?
So I think we have very complex systems which are bound to create compound failure and bound to create unintended consequences. And I'd like to pick just 2 which are very simple, which people may say, well, they're not really black swans, but they used to be black swans. Now they've become a little bit more commonplace. The first is climate change. So I don't think anyone designing an energy system 50, 100 years ago said, let's warm the climate up. They didn't say that. They said, let's give people light, cool, heat, mobility. Let's actually help them generate a great future for themselves. And actually energy is one of the fundamental motors of growth and progress in the world. And it takes people from poverty, if they can afford the energy, to a better state of being. So what's happened as a consequence of that is we have been tearing apart the fabric of the climate by adding more and more carbon dioxide and methane, the component of natural gas, both of which are greenhouse gases into the environment. I don't think when this started, there were a few people who understood it. Nowadays, there are more and more people who understand it. The science has become very clear. And what's more, the engineering solutions to it have become clearer. A point I'd like to make about fat tails is engineering may have brought you a problem, but the only way to solve it is with engineering. So, we now know how to fix climate change. The problem is with carbon capture and storage, carbon capture and use, better use of energy generally, renewables, hydro, and dare I say it, nuclear under the right circumstances. So we know all about that, and we know we can do it. The cost is very high. The more we do, the cheaper it will become, but we need policy to change it. The second fat tail is antimicrobial resistance. Again, antibiotics, which are engineered products nowadays, they're engineered, by engineering the molecules, have done wondrous things to us. Penicillin, a naturally discovered antibiotic, which I may say could only have been brought into existence with great chemical engineering. And Margaret Hutchinson Rousseau, this great unsung hero, while all these men were getting their Nobel Prize in Stockholm, she was at home cleaning up after the kids. She'd actually invented the process to stabilize the antibiotic and build all the doses the troops needed. But these are wondrous things. Unfortunately, excess use of them, imperfect use of them, has created a chance of some terrible consequence on the human race. I think there are up to 19 impossible to cure resistant superbugs at the moment, and they increase in number. I have a conversation always with my good friend and colleague who's the Chief Medical Officer of the United Kingdom, Sally Davis, and we are trying to argue between ourselves which one will kill us first, climate change or AMR? And the answer is we don't know.
Well, that's a little bit of a doom and gloom outcome,
but the
solution is engineering, right?
That's right.
So question number 2, which of these new technologies that's on the horizon are you most excited for personally?
So I'm very excited about the intersection of ultra big data and healthcare and public health and private health. I think this is something extraordinary, where we may be able to replace first-line care with a digital version of first-line care universally. This will help people enormously, help their state of mind, of course, but also probably give them a better result faster than we can do at the moment with a burgeoning population around the world at some feasible cost. I see this as an incredible breakthrough for the future. We're not there yet, and there are plenty of institutional barriers to get there. But in the end, my sense is that if it's really worth doing, we'll get over those barriers. One of the biggest problems, I think, is this resistance which is coming around, which is people don't like their data to be used by others unless they get some sort of compensation or something out of it. The common good should be one of those things, but people have got rather beaten up about what happens to their data when they press accept. And nowadays, they've given away their privacy, but there's a reaction against it. I hope that reaction we can manage. So that's a very big area that I rather like, and I think it's really important for the future.
Would you think that would be more to benefit the bottom billion population, or is that even for first world medical care?
I think it's actually for everybody. I'm very struck by where a physician is in the chain of decisions. They become more and more the final expert as opposed to the front line. So, and that's where they should be. They should be examining all the information they've got, and really then, as they do at very high-end medicine, they should be the expert at the end of the chain, not the person at the beginning. And if you can get the beginning of the chain sorted, then that's what you can do. And I'm very impressed with, I've got glaucoma, and I get treated and diagnosed by a machine and a learning machine until the very last step, when I see a very important expert who says it's about right, or up or down, up a bit, down a bit, makes the final adjustments. I think the main point in discussion with him always is if he says it's pretty well accurate, plus or minus a few percent. But then he makes the point, if he wasn't there, even if it's accurate to plus or minus 2%, it's better than being accurate to plus or minus 100% if there's no physician. So this tends to democratize your point, I think, about the bottom billion. It tends to democratize the capabilities of many people into the many, many populations.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you look at freestyle chess as one of the places where man plus machine is still the best competitor. Pure AI isn't better, and a pure human isn't better. And I wonder if medicine is even more unbounded probably than chess. I may be wrong about that, but the idea that maybe man plus machine there is the best that we're going to be able to do for quite a while.
I think so. I do think AI is a very important, actually, frankly, has been a very important piece of technology both before and during the Second World War and thereafter, moving material, people, and locations around with the U.S. Air Force and the Royal Air Force. All of this was very primitive optimization and learning experiences. It's really important today, but it's not generalized intelligence, it's specific intelligence. And I think we're going to be there for a very, very long time. We may never get to generalized intelligence, but it certainly is a wonderful thing to work with a human. A human has enormous flexibility, enormous creativity, and is able to connect things which have never been connected before. And therefore it makes de novo thoughts as opposed to learned thoughts.
Right.
So I think it's a wonderful thing. It used to be called a long time ago expert decision systems. It's way beyond that now.
So question number 3, I found this part to be particularly fascinating in your book, is the simple concept of a stirrup for a horse. And how does that such a powerful invention? And maybe more importantly, what does that tell us about the future of technology?
So I use the stirrup partly to jog people's thought patterns because it had 2 particular attributes. First, it was very simple and could be made, mass-produced. It's really simple. And secondly, it transformed the technology. It transformed riding a horse into something which was into a transportation medium, controlled medium. So I think that's really important. I think a lot of things can be done this way where you look at very, very basic processes and say, how can I change them? I'm very struck by a bridge here in London, England, where this designer, Thomas Heatherwick, who I think is very creative, decided that a bridge could not stay in one place the whole time because the river was too crowded, and built a bridge that when you didn't need it, it rolled up into a ball and then unrolled itself. So there was nothing wrong with having a bridge to roll up, if you think about it. It changed entirely the way you could access this particular route. I think the other example I've got is the very great engineer, Bob Langer at MIT. He's often called the Edison of medicine. And
it's a very catchy name, by the way.
It's a very catchy name. He is a chemical engineer, but in medicine. He thinks of the bloodstream as a river. And he says in rivers, you don't pollute them with chemicals. You float things along a river to get to a target you need to do something with. So rather than put a lot of chemical in the bloodstream to kill tumors, why not put a little boat in the bloodstream to get to a tumor and kill it from the boat? And I think this is just a sort of incredibly interesting idea, one which is beginning to work. And it shows that, you can re-engineer ideas with simplicity, and it transforms the way you do things.
Yeah, I mean, I find it to be so fascinating that, even take something like luggage with the wheels on it. It seemed like forever for us to put those
Yes.
two pieces together. How many more obvious ideas are just out there in plain sight for us to stumble over?
Well, of course, now we look at the internet and connectivity as something blindingly obvious. But actually, it wasn't until someone did it. And I remember when I was on the board of Intel Corporation a long time ago with Andy Grove, our target was to have 1 billion connected devices. And that seemed impossible. Of course, it's been exceeded somewhat. But it's such a simple idea. If you think about it, don't have it all in one place, have it spread around and get people to talk to each other and connect with each other than by physical mail and physical telephone.
Yeah, seems obvious. So question number 4, how did gunpowder, it seems like it would be this kind of force for destruction and war, yet ironically, you make the argument that it actually led to more peace in the world.
Well, I think all of these things, these weapons, make 2 points. First is they create an atmosphere of mutually assured disturbance, to say the least, if not destruction. And I think that metastable equilibrium tends to reduce the number of times people use things. Over time, the world has become strangely a less violent place because people know that if I can do it, so can you. So we see this mutually assured disturbance taking place everywhere. It's easy to disrupt on both sides. I think we see today, the use of drones and missiles to cause a disruption in the oil market with the attack on Saudi Arabia from somewhere. We don't know where yet. I think up until that moment, I would say that most people were reluctant to do that because they knew something would happen to them. And they would take drones. Drones are dangerous because they can be easily made into destructive weapons. But people have tended to think that if you can do it, so can I. So on a small scale to small scale basis, they avoid it. I could control your drone, send it back to you, and vice versa. But these rules are always broken by in particular, small state, non-state actors or terrorists, and something happens. But these are the exception rather than the rule at the moment. They're bad exceptions, but they are nonetheless exceptions. So I think all these things keep the peace.
Do you think that some of these technologies that create some kind of these asymmetries where, the being able to fly maybe $10,000 worth of drones, I saw one estimate, and do $100 million worth of damage to some critical facility, that ability, like the technology coming now where it could create this asymmetry and sort of how bad you can do for a very low price point.
So I think we have to be vigilant, and we have to have tools and techniques to counter. We've had this problem around airports, for example. People who want to create nuisance just draw flying drones. That super dangerous. They both can crash into or be absorbed into an engine of a plane and cause massive destruction. So you need to have vigilance. But it's the analogy in a slightly different area is, of course, cybersecurity. We've built these complex systems. People can come in an unwelcome way unless we control the boundaries. We keep the most important things to the core. We watch very carefully what's happening. We encourage everybody to be vigilant. Everybody has to watch what's going on. And so we slowly create an environment where the apparent risks are lower and lower. There are always risks, but we can't live life with no risk. I mean, a precautionary principle which says take no risks in cybersecurity, take no risks with any flying object, take no risks with, come to think about it, crossing the road or walking on the sidewalk, which is a problem nowadays because people do use vehicles as weapons on sidewalks. But if you did nothing at all, you would stay at home and then you probably wouldn't take any exercise and then you'd probably have another problem.
Different set of risks.
There are risks. The world is full of risks. I think, again, one of the points I want to make with the book is, you can engineer out a lot of these risks so that the risks or the events become more and more unusual. It doesn't mean to say they will go away forever, but you can certainly engineer a lot of risks out. You don't want to introduce risks. That's the other problem. One of the things I think people say, well, autonomous vehicles will reduce the risk of people dying on the roads. I think in the US there are about 30 to 40,000 road traffic accidents a year, and we think that's bad, and we teach people how to operate a car, an automobile better. We have safety belts, we have lots and lots of safety equipment, but we're not outraged by this number of deaths. If we're now introducing autonomous vehicles, if there's one death with an autonomous vehicle, it's outrage. It's outrage. They've got to be really safe. So machines can help us, but they've got to be absolutely safe. And that's where human beings are intolerant. We're more tolerant to human error than we are machine error. And if you look at 77 Max, you see the same issue.
Yeah, it's kind of irrational. So question number 5. Investors like Warren Buffett have made famous this engineering principle that they've borrowed on a margin of safety. And he'll talk about how if you have a bridge that's rated for 10,000 pounds, you don't drive a truck across that's 9,999. And so you always want to stay away from the edge in every investment opportunity as you're evaluating it. Do you have another concept from engineering for us that might also be useful for investors?
The most important one I think I'd like to choose is the learning curve.
Okay.
So it's a very simple thing that the more you make of something, the cheaper the units become. And people forget that the whole time. When they look at something, they say it's too expensive. The way to make it cheaper is to make more of them. Two things happen. One is you optimize the object or the process, and secondly, you get economies of scale. And so, I come back to climate change. Carbon capture and storage is incredibly expensive at the moment, but the more we did, the cheaper it will become. Solar panels were a luxury item 25 years ago. They are now virtually free at a very low cost. And that's all about the learning curve. So we should not forget it. It is a very important engineering principle. I think in the world there are very few things that don't abide by the learning curve. Probably nuclear power stations. They seem to get more expensive the more you build, but there are regulatory reasons why that's the case.
Do you think that they might come down if we had a little less? I mean, obviously it's an area where we're not going to let somebody tinker in their garage probably with nuclear materials.
No, I'd do that if I were you. I would. I think if we could make small nuclear power stations, very small ones, in a factory, and shrink wrap them, put them on the back of a truck, take them to a site which would have to be guarded, obviously, and then hook them up, then I'm convinced you could get the unit cost down. And indeed, there's a couple of companies in the world which are trying to do that now. And that may cause a revival of the nuclear power industry. It may get cheaper. There are other reasons, of course, people don't like nuclear power. They don't like them in their backyard for very obvious reasons, especially if they've watched Chernobyl recently on one of the
on HBO
post-cable channels.
Yeah. So bonus question that we always ask, and this is for a book recommendation.
So I'm going to give a very different one. I'm going to recommend the collected poems of C.P. Cavafy. I wrote a book I wrote it in 2013, I think, about coming out in business as a gay man. And I realized that one of my secret pleasures when I was in the closet was reading this extraordinary poet called C.P. Cavafy, born in Alexandria in 1860 or so, and died 70 years later, who wrote extraordinary poems, obviously sensual poems about his hidden concerns, but also just amazing poems about observing people. Sitting in a cafe, nowadays none of us have pity. We don't have the time to sit in the cafe and observe closely how people are behaving and watch them for the purpose of observing their personality and their individual mannerisms. And he did that so well.
Well, I think that's the first poetry recommendation we've had, so I appreciate that as someone who thinks that you can actually. I think sometimes we're blind to learning from a little bit different domains, and I think the wider that you read, I think you connect dots that maybe others aren't able to connect. Then
I'm all in favor of that because it puts into context what you're doing. Certainly when you're in business, when you're making products, you always have to stop and ask yourself, well, I can do this. The real question is, should I do this? And should I do this is usually answered by looking more widely than business or engineering into the general civilization that surrounds us.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great place to leave things. John, thanks for coming on the show, and it was a real pleasure.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Before you go, do me the huge honor of picking up your copy of The Rebel Allocator, available on Amazon in both print and digital formats. It's a business person's guide to effective capital allocation, told in a coming-of-age story of a college grad who crosses paths with a wealthy Midwesterner. It's fiction for the nonfiction reader. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you'd like to support this author and purchase their book, click here. If you'd like to become a subscriber to 5GQ, click here. And I included a couple other interviews that you might appreciate right here. Thanks. Happy reading.